It's Conversations with Community Giants. Thank you for tuning in. We are back once again. We are doing another one of our Conversations with Community Giants. Today is Women Advancing Equity and Impact on Staten Island. Again, if you're just tuning in, Shane DeMare for the Staten Island Advance. Right next to me, Dr. Gracelyn Santos. And today, again, something we try to do once every month or so, bring you some information and speak to some amazing guests, a panel of three we're going to introduce in a few seconds. Today's discussion will highlight the challenges and triumphs of three phenomenal women leaders on Staten Island across government, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. In the next hour, we will explore how they are advancing representation, access, and equity in their communities. And now, Dr. Gracelyn Santos.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us in person and online. We're very happy to see you for the 10th installment of the Staten Island Advance, SILive.com, Community Giants. These trailblazing women, who we will introduce in a second, offer critical insight into the systemic barriers that continue to limit progress, as well as the strategies they've used to challenge the status quo. From advocating for inclusive policy and expanding opportunities for underrepresented individuals on Staten Island and beyond, to fostering collaboration across sectors, their leadership styles model what it means to drive meaningful, community-centered change.
And of course, we will introduce them in a second, but first, we want to make sure that we recognize members of Advanced Leadership who are joining us here today. We have Caroline Harrison, CEO of Advanced Local and publisher of the Advanced SILive.com. We have Brian Leyline, the Advanced SILive.com executive editor, and of course, Gail Lubin, the Advanced SILive.com senior content director. And please welcome our publisher to say a few words, Caroline Harrison.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Gracelyn. Thank you to our local diversity committee for your efforts in putting this wonderful panel together of women leaders who really sit at the highest perch in their respective organizations, not-for-profit and cultural organizations on Staten Island. And today, we can explore, from your perspective, how you are using that position of power and influence to effect inclusiveness, elevate voices throughout the community, both in terms of your outreach and in terms of the content that you produce within your organizations. It's not dissimilar from what we do here at the Staten Island Advance and SI Live. So very excited to have you here. It really continues the work along our mission here at the Staten Island Advance and SI Live, as well as Advance Local, which is all about strengthening and empowering the community. So it's a perfect match. And I really do want to just say a quick thank you to our sponsor for these events, which is the Staten Island Social Care Network, which helps to make these wonderful conversations possible. So again, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. And now, Gracelyn, if you will do the honors introducing our three esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Shane. And thank you, Caroline, for those welcoming words. Today's panelists are three of Staten Island's prominent leaders who happen to be women. First, we have Tatiana Arguello-Sabatelli, Executive Director of Nonprofit Staten Island, the only borough-based nonprofit association in New York City, and has twice appeared on City and State's Staten Island Power 100 list. Seated next to her is Jessica Baldwin Phillips, the CEO of Historic Richmond Town, a living history village and museum on Staten Island, New York. She has served as CEO since September 2018 and is known for her expertise in museum leadership and historical preservation. Next to her is another wonderful Jessica Baker Vodoor, President and CEO of Snug Harbor Cultural Center. Since joining Snug Harbor's team in 2022, Jessica Vodoor has secured over $22 million in new city capital project funding and has activated more than $38 million in previously stalled city and state appropriations. Okay, let's get into it. Let's learn more about these exemplary exemplary women leaders on Staten Island and hopefully inspire the next generation of thought leaders and change makers. As always, please feel free to ask any questions throughout the discussion. Okay, so please jump in anytime you want. We'll start with Tatiana, but you each have a microphone. If you'd like to just grab it. I'm just going to lead off with a very general question. What does leadership look like for women on Staten Island, as opposed to what it looks like in New York City in general?
First, thank you all for having me here on this very important panel. I think it is just tremendously important to keep uplifting different issues, and the equity issue in regards to women is one that's very important. In terms of your question of what does leadership look like on Staten Island, I think the future is bright. I think there's something to be hopeful about because we are seeing a changing landscape, right? Where the nonprofit sector is the largest employer of Staten Islanders, right? And so with that being true, and now we're seeing a lot of leaders step into nonprofit executive roles. We are seeing a changing momentum, right? We are seeing women who are leading large organizations, one that I'm sure will be announced shortly, but the largest organizations too, very grassroots organizations. And you can see just how that equalizes the playing field, right? Where if you look at the trajectory of the nonprofit sector, it was predominantly, like every other field, man dominated on the top. And we're seeing an equalizer in terms of women leadership, especially in the nonprofit sector.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think especially for the museum industry, it was also male-dominated, especially at the top, but it has pinked quickly, along with like the education field. A lot of women went into it, but still the principals, the high-level administrators were still men. But that has changed in the last 15 years, and you can see it here on Staten Island as we are all women leading key nonprofits, key cultural institutions on this island. So I think Staten Island's right there with the trend.
I would agree, and in fact, I would say that Staten Island might even be ahead of the trend. I'm a relatively new Staten Islander. I've been here now just over 2 years, and I really think the women leadership in Staten Island is really exemplary, and I see a lot more visibility of women in leadership roles here in Staten Island than I have in my work in other parts of the city, and I have felt quite a difference actually being here in Staten Island and seeing the visibility is really significantly more present than I have experienced when I was working in Manhattan or working in Brooklyn.
All three of you have kind of touched on the unique way of the work you do here on Staten Island, and we could start on the end for this one. How has Staten Island, known as like the forgotten borough, how is the work you think more unique here, more different, challenging, or helps bring more success to the work you do?
Well, I mean, Snug Harbor is obviously a very important piece of the Staten Island cultural infrastructure, and I personally don't love the forgotten borough phrase. I think it's a bit of a branding problem and one that we continue to repeat, and so I try not to use that phrase a lot because I really think that I prefer a phrase that came out in a recent artist in residency at Snug Harbor where tried to redub Staten Island as the borough of possibilities because I really see that as the future is wide and openly possible of lots of different things to happen here. And I think you see a spirit here that is open to change, but change in a way that's rooted in the people's desires and needs here in Staten Island. And I think that's a really interesting part of being a leader in Staten Island.
Yeah, I also don't attribute the forgotten borough. I don't love that myself as a new Staten Islander. It's an incredible borough. It's equal to all our fellow boroughs. We're part of New York City. And just, I mean, you said how much multiple millions of dollars has the city helped invest in Snug Harbor. I mean, that's incredible. And so clearly we are a part of our broader community. But if you do want to play into that forgotten borough narrative, we're kind of amazing and unexpected. So when we go to see our cultural counterparts and our nonprofit counterparts in Manhattan or other boroughs, they are impressed with the professionalism and the excellence that Staten Island brings to those meetings.
I don't think we should applaud too quickly, though, because we have done studies that show that the philanthropist and just the government spending here on Staten Island is actually at the lowest percentage, right? For example, when you're looking at discretionary funding, we're 6% of we're 6% of the population of New York City, barely scratching the surface at 2%. So while I agree, I don't really love the unforgotten phrasing. There is an aspect of being unforgotten, right? And like we have to work twice as hard to sometimes not even be heard, right, in those spaces. And so I think that that we need to be a presence citywide. I think that that's super important, and I think that when we do take up space, that folks do see us, right? And so that just is important to remember, because even though we're trying to change that narrative and we don't particularly love it, and there is still that inequality that exists in funding and also visibility.
In keeping with that, let's talk about representation gap. As of 2024, women make up about 10.6% of Fortune 500 CEOs, a record high, but still very low compared to men who own 90%. And female CEOs of the S&P 500 companies earn about 85 cents for every dollar that a man makes, reflecting a persistent gender pay gap, even in the highest leadership levels. I just would like to have a comment from you ladies.
It's outrageous. Like, how can women make 85 cents to a man's dollar? Is our work less than their work? It's not, and we can all agree that it is not. And I don't understand why this cannot change. And while 85 cents to the dollar is an improvement to its historical lows, it's still not a one-to-one. And that does happen here, and it happens in other boroughs. It happens in our industry too. You know, when I accepted my job, I was offered it at a lower rate than a predecessor had, and that person was a male, and it's not acceptable.
I think it's interesting too that I think there's a stigma that happens with women, in particularly with negotiations or that sort of thing, where the same type of negotiation that a man might have, if a woman was conducting that same approach, could be viewed as too aggressive, there's a certain lens that I think still exists today. And I think it presents a barrier, a hurdle for women leaders to have to get over, to find the right way to negotiate that's not too challenging, but that still is assertive and puts your worth forward. Because really that's what it's about, is knowing what you're worth and asking for it.
We could start on this end over here. I'd love for each of you to share a moment, if you could, throughout your careers where maybe it was that defining moment where you realized, feeling like a trailblazer, where you're breaking barriers that obviously got all three of you here today. We could start down here.
I don't know if there was a moment, but when I think back to even just switching over from service provision to being in a more intermediary role, I had this woman working for me, and she is an incredible woman educator, also a decade older than I am. And I remember her just telling me, I really look up to you. And I'm like, yeah, but like you're older than me, and like I didn't really do anything special this week. Like, I don't know. I'm also feeling kind of like nervous and scared and all these different things. And she told me that is something that still sticks with me. She was like, because I see you and your transition and getting accepted into that executive director role, she goes, now I know it's possible. Because when she was looking around, and again, a decade older, a whole doctorate degree and all of this, didn't think an executive director position was made for someone like her. And it switched my thinking, because I'm like, whoa, but she's so qualified and accomplished, but it also had me reflecting, because when I looked around, I didn't really see folks that look like me that, are doing certain things. And I do think that there is power in representation. And so for me, that's when I was like, oh, wow, like, I need to be that representation that sometimes I don't see, but it was really important for me to hear that, and something I try to remind other people when they're emulating values that I respect and like, that in itself is a beautiful reminder.
I I have a clear moment that was when I had started a new role and working internationally I was running a circus in Macau, China. And I went to my first production meeting, which was actually in Belgium. And I walked into this room, and it was this giant conference room, and there were about 38 people around the table, and I sat down and I looked around the table and I realized that I was the only female in the room and at the table, and I was really struck by that because I had been in other professional theatrical environments that were much more mixed and much more present of women, but this was my first time working internationally, and I realized that how much further we had to go sitting at that table. And even in the midst of that meeting, I realized that, the dynamic of me speaking was uncomfortable for some of the men at the table. And I could feel it almost immediately. And I realized in that moment that, that we had a lot more work to do, and that, it was not okay that I was the only woman sitting at that table, because as I continued to work on that show, there were incredible women involved in every angle of that production, but not at the table. And so that was really stuck with me and something that I think about quite often.
I had, when I got this job at Historic Richmond Town on Staten Island, the organization is 168 years old, and I was the first woman to lead it. I mean, this organization saw women's suffrage come and go, and yet the first woman to ever lead it. And I think that was a moment for me where I was like, wow, I have broken a ceiling.
Speaking of perception gaps, surveys show that nearly 40% of Americans believe that men are better suited for executive leadership positions than women, reflecting a persistent bias. What, in your opinions, are the systemic barriers that you have noticed with women aspiring to leadership positions on Staten Island, if any?
I don't think there is a gender gene that qualifies men or women to be like smarter, more capable. I don't. That's not scientific. So for me, I think that there is these perceptions, though, right? Whether it be females are more emotional, they're not as strong, right? Or they're not as tough. I actually think that those are things that are strengths, because I think that being compassionate is a strength, actually. And I think that the work that we're doing today is a lot different than the work that we were doing maybe 200 years ago, where you really did rely on the physical strength of people, right? And we don't necessarily rely on that today. It's about the strength of your mind and what you can actually bring to the table. So I definitely think that women are just as strong, right, as men, and there is that component of being emotional intelligent that is needed in the workplace. So I see that as also a strength.
I think having more women in leadership will be that change, because unless you've had a woman as your boss, you've only known what a man is as a leader. And that's your example. And maybe you've had some great bosses that are men, but until you have a woman who's a boss who's also great, then you'll say, wow, women can do all the things that men can do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, if you go deeper into it too, and you talk about and you think about how were the success metrics ever developed to begin with? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be a successful leader, and where did that idea come from, and how long ago did that emerge? And I think, those things are changing, as well as the representation of women in the workplace, I hope. And I think we're all, striving to kind of redefine what those objectives are and what it means to be a strong leader. I think it means a different thing today than it did even 10 years ago.
Can I just jump in, because I also want to mention, I think, an elephant that's in certain rooms. The idea of caregiving, care bearing. I think that that's such an important thing to put on the table, because obviously women, as of right now, are the only gender that can reproduce. And so I often am at the age of thinking about that, of, what do you put first, your family, your career, how do you have it all? And so I think that that's a challenge too. I think executives are often thinking about who and when they're promoting folks, like, is this person going to go on maternity leave? And, and so that's just something I want to name, because I do see that as a barrier of having to carry that load of caring for children, and sometimes even being a sandwich, having to care for your parents as well. And so your family duties and then carrying on with your work and professional life as well is challenging.
And to piggyback on that, I mean, just because females bear children doesn't mean we're the best caretakers for them. You know, if you are married to a man or you have a family with a man, maybe the man is also, his aptitude is better for caregiving. So I think that's a stereotype, and I agree.
I have nothing else to add. I think you summed it up perfectly, and I think that's true. It's gender stereotypes, and a lot of times, that caregiving idea, or even the choice to have children or not have children. I personally have not had children, and I do think that shaped my career progression in a way that has weirdly helped me, and I've not had to face some of the barriers that I think some of my colleagues who have had children have had to face, and I do think that that's a reality and part of being a woman leader. But I will say I don't think I've ever looked at anyone and said, I'm not going to hire this person because they might want to have a child in a couple of years. Like, that's not something that ever occurred to me.
You might not,
but no, I'm just saying,
happens.
I know that does happen. I'm just saying that maybe that's a benefit for women leadership, because that has never crossed my mind.
Right, and I have children, and you're recently a newlywed, so we have a spectrum of female leadership here as far as immediate families are concerned.
Appreciate all that, ladies. And also, we just want to take a time to remind you, we're going to take some questions in a few. We try to space it out a little bit as we approach the halfway point. And also remind everyone that this episode of Conversations with Community Giants is brought to you by Staten Island Social Care Network, connecting Medicaid members to free social care services like food, housing, transportation, and more. Contact them to see if you are eligible at statenislandpps.org. Any questions so far that we have before Graceland calls on someone and puts up? We got anyone over here? We got one? Do we got one? We usually, he knows. I can't call him out, but he knows he has to do it. Here we go. It's going over to Brian right now. Here we go, sir.
I do this every time. I've worked with the three of you for quite a bit, and I don't see it. But it always has amazed me, though, it's particularly with the Staten Island cultural institutions, the nonprofits, how many females are running the organizations. But do you ever feel any pushback from staff, male staff in particular, in terms of the job you have? And then outside of your institution, do you feel pushback when you go out? I mean, Jessica, you said you were in a room with all men and around a table. Like, if you're applying for funding or whatever it might be, do you feel pushback at all?
I have definitely. And the only time that's happened so far in Staten Island was just an off comment that somebody made to me once when they said that I didn't look like a president. And I said, and it was very just sort of off the cuff, oh, you don't really look like a president. And I was like, well, what does that mean exactly? I think I do actually look like a president, or this is kind of what presidents look like these days. But I didn't say any of those things. I just sort of was stunned by it, because it does still stun you when that happens. But I would say since working with my staff right now, I have not really faced that, but I did in that particular project. It was a real issue in that particular setting. It was a very international mixed group, and a lot of men, and a lot of men in positions of power, and not a lot of women in positions of power. And I got dismissed on a fairly regular basis and had to really fight. And ultimately, it was why I left the position, one of the main reasons, because that fight was exhausting, and I didn't feel like I wanted to be in a place anymore where I had to prove my worth on a continual basis every single day. And so you leave when that happens, and you find the next thing, because that kind of energy really does, I think, hurt a company to have that in a way that can be. And I was the top leader in that organization at the local level, but there was a organization over me, kind of a parent company, that was a part of the culture of that organization, and it was tough, definitely.
I was interviewed for a job, and I was offered the job, and I got the contract, and I signed it, and I sent it to them, and they didn't know it, but I was 8 months pregnant. And I said, I need to talk to you. And they said, oh, well, why? I mean, you signed everything. I said, well, I need to tell you something, and I'd like to tell you to your face. Now, we had in-person interviews, but I guess I wasn't showing big enough, and I wore baggy clothes on purpose. And I showed up to the restaurant, and the two men who were doing the hiring were floored. Their mouths were agape. "Oh my gosh, you are very pregnant." I said, "Yes, I am, and I am due in 6 weeks." I said, "So I do want this job, and I would like to just talk about leave and how this, just let's plan. So we have some questions for you." I said, "Oh, okay. Ask away. Is this your first kid?" That's not a question you're supposed to ask somebody. Do you have a nanny? Is your husband helpful? I mean, this is mind-blowing things. I mean, this happened within the last 10 years. This is not 1920. So I have been treated differently because I'm a woman. And it's shocking. No one asked my husband about his career trajectory when we were about to have a baby.
I think it happens, and I've seen it happen in so many stages of my career, and it probably is an HR violation to share any of them, but but I think the reality is that there's a part of intersectionality that goes into that, right? Because when I was leading a team previously, and we had a huge team, right? And I just remember one comment from someone who, and this happened more than twice to me, but like, who was working there prior to me being named manager or leader or whatever. And he didn't want to take orders from me and he was going around telling everyone, I don't take orders from women and younger women than I am. And so I think that there's a little piece of intersectionality because I am a young leader, so like age is also a part of it, and race and also gender in that case. And so I think that for him it was very difficult, and he ended up twice, two different people ended up leaving because of that, and they just could not. So I think it unveils itself in weird ways, but it definitely is something that I think we've all seen. So unfortunately, yes, we've seen that.
I'm wondering, do you think that as a female leader of an organization, do you think you bring something different to the table as a leader, as a woman, as opposed to a man, inherently?
No. Both are awesome, and both have the amazing capability to lead.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you think there'll ever be a woman president?
Yes.
Do you think America will ever be ready for that?
Yes, we will be.
I hope so.
I believe it.
In what century?
Unknown. I hope this one.
Yeah.
We have a long ways to go.
We do, but you have to believe,
Yeah.
I think.
We just had the term brought up of intersectionality. That was one of the next questions that we had. So beautiful segue. Thank you for that. We could start being brought up over here. What role does, you obviously touched on one already, intersectionality, race, class, immigrant status, play in the barriers women encounter locally, do you think?
Yeah, I think the intersectionality plays a huge role because every experience is different. It's very unique in the sense of even just the three phenomenal women, including myself, that you have on this panel. We all have different experiences, right? That's shaped by our immigration status. Like, I'm so happy to be living in a day where I was born in this country, and that's a privilege, right? And then you do have some disadvantages, right, or cultural not norms that play into effect. So it's like not just being a woman; it's maybe being a woman who is of a different religion, right? Or maybe being, for me, a Latina woman, right? And so that's a different experience than someone who is white passing or someone who has a different religion, right? And so so that will shape everyone's experience. I think it really does. It has to be a broader conversation than just, whether you support women or not. It really is a spectrum.
I think I have found myself navigating class as a barrier, particularly as a leader of a cultural institutions group member institution. I come from a working class family, and there are not a lot of working class leaders of nonprofit cultural institutions in New York City, and there's a certain rarefied society level that leaders often are in these organizations, and you kind of have to be. And so I think that you have to be because you need to know the people who are giving the money, and you have to, the better you know those people, the better you do in your job in terms of raising money. And so that's definitely been something for me that I don't know that that's about necessarily being a woman, but being a woman and someone sort of sitting in I think one of the first CIG breakfasts I ever went to was at like the Yale Club or something, and you walk in this room, and I was nervous, and I look around the room, there's all these fancy names that I've seen on buildings that are sitting at the table, and you just think, okay, I can be in this room and I can do this, and and it's just but that's confidence that you have to develop, and it's something I'm still working on, honestly. But that's definitely, I think, something I think about a lot, that intersection, and feeling like I know how to be in those rooms, and I know how to have those conversations with people that I might not haven't gone to boarding school with, or those sorts of things. So that's definitely for me something that I've recently been navigating in an interesting way.
If I can jump in, because that's very interesting that you said the intersectionality of your gender, of your class, and all those other interesting things. I wanted to ask you, as the CEO of Snug Harbor, you're steering institutional growth, community engagement, and transforming Staten Island's premier cultural campus. Now, this unique perspective that you have in your leadership, what does that mean for all communities of Staten Island in terms of communities that may have not been exposed to the culture and the programming that Snug Harbor and other nonprofits on Staten Island offer?
Yeah. Well, it was really interesting when I first started in this job. One of the things I heard a lot in my first rounds of conversations with people, I heard a lot of people say that they thought that Staten Island, that Snug Harbor wasn't for them, or that they thought that somehow there was this perception of it being the big white house on the hill with the big gate around it that was keeping people like me out. I heard that a lot. And I was really, because that was not the experience that I had, intersecting with Snug Harbor. And so, but there was a real perception of that in the community. And so that was one of the first things I wanted to try to take on and try to think about. How do we open those gates? How do we make people feel and know, not just feel, that this place is for every Staten Islander? And so one of the first things, we tried to do was just to think about, how do we step back a little bit from the leading programming point of view, and how do we say, okay, what do you want to do in this space? What is your community seeking in terms of how you might use a cultural center, how you might use, and I think one of our biggest successes have been a lot of these community-driven festivals that we've started to really cultivate, just welcoming that and saying, yes, this should be at our cultural center, and we should have these of every variety of community member, and the associated groups that go along with it. Please come, please, and not saying we're going to tell you what that should be, but more saying, what should that be? How can we help you? How can we support your vision of what you might want this event to be? And so that's really the approach we've tried to take, and I think it's going pretty well.
We're going to touch a little bit on allies. For all three of you, obviously rising to successful positions that you're in right now, the question we have here is, what role can men play to better support women in roles of leadership that you are right now? Specifically, is there any instance where you were like, this guy gets it, he's helping me out here, or treating me fairly, or as opposed to things that men may do in the workplace, like you mentioned, I won't work with this woman. How can men be better allies in the workplace?
I think men are wonderful allies. For every story that I have about a hater, I also have a story about how a man has lifted me up, and I do think that that's a part of it, right? Like, I think it's everyone's role to think about equality and about levering the playing fields, because it's not. To be a feminist isn't to hate women, to hate men, right? It's about how we address the inequalities that we see in our society. And so men are wonderful allies. I think of Chris Ferreira, I think of Dr. Carolina, I think of Sean Trafford. Those are allies for me. They open doors, right, where they have those connections. I think of my husband, Stephen Sabatelli, and just how they're willing to stand by you, open doors that I personally wasn't invited to, right? And bring you into that fold and then tell everyone else, they're cool, they can be trusted, you can build a relationship with this person. And so I think that that's the role to love women and to continue opening those doors, because it is the equalizer.
Yeah, and I would say to keep looking around that table too, and asking yourself who's not there. And it may be a woman, it might be different ethnicities. It might be, I think that conversation, that questioning of who's missing from this room right now. And I do think that's important, that, I would like to see all of my male allies continuing to realize when they're in a room full of men, and to have that dawn on them. I think that's important, because I do think those rooms still exist.
Mm-hmm. I know that some of my best mentors have been men. And maybe that's because the majority of the leaders in my life have all been male. But there have been amazing men who have helped me understand how to navigate those rooms where you're the only woman in them, and to lift me up and to say, no, she's great. You got to listen to this person. She knows what she's talking about. And I think being that advocate, just like you would be an ally in any other situation.
I have an interesting question that it's two parts. Simple, but yet deserves some discussion. Can women have it all? A lot of times, that's just the tag phrase. We can have it all. Personally, the older I get, I'm realizing you can have it all, but not at the same time. But I wanted to find out what your feelings.
I think it depends on what is all to you. And I think the stereotype is, women want this great career, they want this great partner, they want great children, they want, vacation. That's the all. But that's not all for every woman. And I think you can have what matters most to you. And I always tell my interns or any of my mentees, work is amazing. It can be very fulfilling if you do what you love or you found value in your job. But just remember that when you retire, your job is not going to be there for you. It's your friends, it's your family. So be careful what side of the fence you water, and maybe there's no fence in your life, and that's okay, but you have to really be intentional with the choices that you make.
Will you be my mentor?
Yes. Can I come to some of your festivals?
Yes. I think it's hard. I think that question is hard, and I think every woman struggles with that, no matter if you're a leader or not a leader. I think it's that idea is I want to do away with that idea, because I think it does depend on where you are in your life and what generation are you in? Are you, where, what's most important to you right now? And I think for me, I've seen over the course of my career that has changed really dramatically. What I want today is not the same thing that I wanted 25 years ago. And I think that the biggest thing that I have found to push aside that question is to ask myself, what are the things that I want right now? And what are the things I'm working towards? And to have an active practice of really looking at that and working towards the goals that I have for myself, and not try to be influenced by this outside idea of what other people think is all. And that's worked for me.
Also, why don't we ask men that? Why aren't there TikTok, all that, well, can you have it all, sir?
That's a good point. Well, now I don't want to say anything now. Now, how do I follow?
No, you're an ally. You're an ally.
Shut up. No, I will also want to ask each of you women. You mentioned some of the mentors you have, obviously specifically women. What are some of those mentors that you've had along the way, and what are some of the biggest things you've taken from them?
Wow, I stand on the back of so many wonderful women. I think of my grandmother first. She was born and raised in Nicaragua, elementary school education, and just literally, she had 7 children, right? And she sent them all to the U.S. without her, and sacrificed so much for her children and for her family. And I think about how strong she was and about how much she accomplished, right? Despite being an orphan, despite being, from a war-torn country. And that gives me a lot of hope, right? And strength, because I know that all my silly problems are nothing compared to what she's had to endure. I think about my strong mother as well. And I'm also grateful to be here on Staten Island, because I have developed a wonderful network of women who have no problem lifting you up, right? And looking behind and not closing the door behind them. And so we have a leading ladies group that meets, and I think that I look up to every single one of them, and I'm just grateful to be the fly in the wall in that space. But I even think about someone like my board chair, Yesenia Mata, who inspires me every day and who pushes me to think bigger, to dream bigger, to want more, and to have respect for myself.
I think you said about your grandmother, that's incredible. Like, to lift up our families and our ancestors is really important. And the work that we do and what they went through so we can do what we do is like really impressive from reaching back from time as a historian. And I think outside of my family, my maternal grandmother and my mother, I don't have any mentors that are women. So I really can't answer that.
I feel lucky to also have an amazing family and strong. I come from a family of strong women on all sides of my family, powerful women who've sort of done different things, groundbreaking things in their lives. And my mother, both of my grandmothers, my sister. So I think, you see that a lot in strong women, that they come from strong women who taught them that it's okay to be who you want to be. And not only is it okay, that you absolutely have to be who you want to be. And there's nothing, no compromises in that, whatever that thing is that you want. But professionally, I had a really wonderful early mentor in my late teen years, a woman who ran a small theater in Tampa, who took me under her wing and gave me my first professional job in theater. And when I was 19 years old, asked me to be her managing director of a theater company, which was insane. But gave me this experience because she saw something in me and trusted me, and I'll never forget her. And I don't forget her. I'm in touch with her still to this day. And she opened a door. She lifted out her hand to me and said, "I see you. You don't have experience. You don't have, but I see what your brain does, and I see the way you think, and that's what I want." And I try to think about that when I work with young women today, and I try to emulate that idea and just to see people who are working around you, to see through maybe the challenges that they're having to that spark that they have, and try to invest in that and help them see themselves and what they can be. So Wendy Lee is her name, and I think about her all the time, and I'm very appreciative of her.
Yay, Wendy.
This question is for Jessica Phillips. You are a regular guest speaker at the University of Delaware and the CUNY School of Law on management through the lens of teamwork and diversity. As someone who doesn't fall into an underrepresented group, what is the message that you have in these lectures, and what have you taken away from mentoring the younger generation?
I love speaking to the college students because the statistic you gave at the top of this panel about the percentage of female leaders, they do not have access. These are people who are going to go on to be, CEOs of S&P. They have never met a chief executive officer of anything yet as a woman. And so to come to them and be able to spend 45 minutes with them and explain how I manage, which is no different how a man manages. It's just how a good leader manages, I hope. I don't know, talk to my staff. But I think that's the lens which I try and make sure that they hear my job experience, my life experience, is that management is not about a woman or a man. It's about being a good leader, listening to your staff, having compassion. Men have compassion, women have compassion, and being honest, doing the right thing, leading by example. And I think that's how when I talk to the students. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
makes absolute sense. And I just wanted to follow up with, do you think, and all three of you, that women have to work twice as hard as men to get the same respect, the same results?
Yes.
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 What legacy do each of you hope that you can lead for the next generation going forward? What is the biggest messages that you can give to hopefully other future women leaders?
I am what a president looks like.
That's great.
You can do it. Like, this is what we do. We do it every day, and, we represent the possibilities. It's possible.
I definitely think we have to be the change that we want to see in our society. I think about just the work that the Advance is doing, and even just something that they had uplifted a little bit before the pandemic about, the Tale of Two Cities, right? And how important it is to uplift some of those statistics, right? Of being on the North Shore, being a Staten Islander, this is what we look like. There's 1 out of every 5 residents here on Staten Island that are Hispanic, right? And it's a changing landscape. And I think for me, that legacy is bringing those faces into the forefront, because that's our community. That's who we serve, right? And I think that it's so important for our community to see women leaders, to see complex leaders, to see people who are passionate about the work that they're doing, to see people who are making an actual difference. So that's the legacy, to see more people who are younger in positions, to see women in position, to see women of color in positions. Hopefully they can look at me and see that that's a possibility, and that hopefully inspires them to make the change that they also want to see.
Tatiana, this is for you. In your leadership with nonprofit Staten Island, you have been building out something called capacity building programs, known as the Nonprofit on the Go. Could you please speak more on that? I thought that was such a very catchy title for it.
The Nonprofit on the Go. I actually can take credit for that completely, because that was a response to me being a little angry and around the discretionary contracts, and that there isn't funding for capacity building for nonprofits, right? And so some organizations get funding to support businesses in general, but as I mentioned earlier, nonprofits is the leading sector here on Staten Island. So I thought it was really important to use the language that folks are using in policy spaces, and so the model was a chamber on the go. So I just made a nonprofit on the go, and the thought behind that was to bring resources here to Staten Island, and we have a cohort in our second year, and we actually just wrapped up, but the model is a peer exchange, right? So it's action learning, it's free access to coaches, to clinics. And so these are the things that we know can make a difference when you have a mentor, when you have time to really wrestle through a problem or challenge that you're arising. And we see how this has impacted our workforce already, who has gotten promoted, who might have left that position and moved on, who might have solve their complex issue, and so who have made new networks. So we are creating the space because we saw the need, and we just kind of revised the language to make it fit to what we're doing.
I want to remind everyone really quick that we have just about 10 minutes left here or so, and that if you are watching right now, this episode of Conversations with Community Giants is brought to you by Staten Island Social Care Network, connecting Medicaid members to free social care services like food, housing, transportation, and more. Contact them to see if you are eligible at statenislandpps.org. Any questions? Do we have anyone else here? Brian can't ask anymore, so is there anyone else? Tracy, we're coming over with the microphone. Here we go.
So all of you, I think you do a great job at what you do. What advice would you give young people? What advice would you give young women, maybe just starting out college, who want to be in your position one day?
Networking is really important. My first museum job, I was a low-level coordinator. It was a lowly job, but it wasn't a lonely job. There was a lot more people at that level, and we all had a camaraderie together. We were working in the trenches together, and from the years since then, a handful of us has risen in the ranks of nonprofit leadership, and those bonds and those connections you cannot replace. So networking, I think, is a really and authentic networking.
Yeah, and I think I would say some of the best experiences that I've had so far in my career have been when I took on a project that was not really part of my job description, but it was something I was interested in or something that I wanted to get involved in, and so that ability or that flexibility to say, okay, I'm gonna make some time for this, or I'm gonna juggle a few things to try to take on this project, and I think served me really well and gave me some great experiences to learn new parts of myself, and so my advice I think would be to not let yourself be limited by what your job says it is on paper, and to be engaged with your workplace and look for those opportunities where you can get involved in something slightly different, because it's through those experiences that you start to grow and find new parts of yourself that you didn't even know existed.
That's great.
One thing, if I was looking at myself at 18, I would tell myself, be confident. I think we are told as women oftentimes, shrink yourself, or, be ambitious, but not too ambitious.
Do it demurely.
Right. But the reality is that, you are you. Mm-hmm. And to be authentically yourself, there's a value in that. There's something that anyone can replace, right? I have a twin sister, and we're so different, and there's a uniqueness that, we all are bringing. And so I think that the sooner that you horn into your authentic self and you stop shrinking yourself, that's when you can turn that into your superpower, because that's when you're really going to build those relationships and build the trust and build those experiences that you're looking for by being yourself and then seeing what attracts.
That's great. Thank you.
Graceland?
I'd like to ask you wonderful women, if you can look back and think of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome in your career, what were they or it, and what did you learn from it? And what advice would you give others maybe going through the same difficulties?
I think people are always going to hate. To what you said before. Haters are going to hate, and this too shall pass.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't let it get to you. I mean, and it's going to get to you, because no one wants to be unliked. Everybody wants to be liked. No one wants to think that people don't think that they're good or great, or that they're envious or jealous. But that's going to happen no matter what industry you're in or where you are. And that's okay. And just like Tatiana said, be confident and just keep going, because this too shall pass.
Yeah. I had somebody tell me once, never waste a good crisis. Because that is, those are the moments where if you can get yourself out of the headspace that, oh, this is the end of the world and whatever, everything's ruined or everything's failed, that those are those moments where you can see transformation is possible, because you have to find some transformation in those moments. And so that's something that somebody said to me when in the midst of the COVID situation, when it first exploded, and at the time I was working in Times Square, and 42nd Street went from this bustling hub of tourists to basically the apocalypse at the end of the world. It's sort of what it felt like. And to be in charge of the safety and security of that block at that time was a huge stress and a huge responsibility. But I remember at the time thinking of that and thinking, okay, what is, how do we take this crisis and turn it into the next thing that this organization can be, that this block could be, and And I think that was just that mantra of, how can I see this situation differently, was helpful and remains helpful for me. I try to find that and hold on to that. I have it written down on a little piece of paper that I look at sometimes, because it is a really good phrase to get yourself out of the mindset of like, oh, doom and gloom, and I'm never going to get out of this situation. How do you find the silver lining? How do you think about what positive could come out of this challenge that you're facing?
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of challenges, and I don't necessarily want to name one, but one thing that has stuck with me is like the idea of breathing through the difficulties, and that's been really helpful, because most of the time you're not on the operating table, right? That's the reality. Unless you actually are on the operating table, then this message is not for you. Focus. But breathing often, I think, helps regulate, and often when you're coming back to something, you come back more grounded. You probably have had the ability to communicate more effectively with whomever the challenge is with, or whatever the challenge might be. And then one other thing with that is the power of collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I realized that I can't do it myself, that was the moment that things started happening for me, because you have to realize you are who you surround yourself with, and you are your team too. And so you can go further together. And so breathing has done a lot for me, and also realizing, how do you get your tribe? How do you get your people to go together? Because that's how you go further, and that's how problems are actually addressed and solved.
Yeah.
I have a final question, unless Shane wants to follow up. My question is, what have you sacrificed for your career, and would you do it all over again?
I don't know if it's a sacrifice or a regret, but my maternal grandmother, who I named my daughter after, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And there was a lot going on at work, had a new baby, and I'm like gonna get sad. But I could only go visit her once, because I felt at the time that my job needed me, my staff needed me, I had to be there. And I'm, looking back at that time with some perspective, they didn't. It would have been fine. They're amazing. They would have been fine. I could have gone and spent a week and been there. So sometimes those sacrifices, those regrets, they happen. And I think they happen to men, women, in every industry.
I think my biggest sacrifice was I moved away from my family. I grew up in Florida, and my family is all still in Florida. I'm in touch with them regularly. My mom might even be watching. But I had to move to New York to find my career. And that was, and has been, a choice and a sacrifice to be, thousands of miles away from my close family. And I know that they understand and they support my choice. And but that is something that I feel, I feel that every day being away from them. And we try to stay close and stay in touch. And I try to, as much as I can, use the benefits of my career to be able to do things with my family in ways that I might not have been able to do if I stayed in Florida, and would have had a very different career trajectory than I've had. But that was definitely a sacrifice.
I want to start by saying, yes, I would do it all over again. But I think that we sacrifice, just as professionals, your time, your energy, your talents. And I think it's something that is really important to remember, that balance, because I had recently heard of a statistic that BIPOC leaders are actually twice as more likely to die. And so I went on this retreat 2 weeks ago, and it was a retreat that Still Rising was doing, and it's 8 executive directors, all of color, across the city. Only Staten Islander, shocker, right? And so we're in this space, and Diana just ends up saying that to us, and I'm looking around the table, and they're like, who here has had a near-death experience? And I'm like, oh God. And almost half the room was like me. And so one thing I've realized was to make sure to take time for yourself, for self-care, and to make sure that it's not just work. Because yes, we do sacrifice a lot of time and energy and effort, but not to the point that it's going to kill you. And so that was a good reminder because, again, I'm young and we have a lot of career left in me, and I want to be around. And so that's a good reminder that to put out there that don't take anything too seriously, and it will get done. And, lean on other people.
Yeah.
And you do have to make time for your family and choose that very actively, because in these types of jobs, it doesn't necessarily, that time just doesn't make itself available to you. You do have to prioritize it and say, it's time to go home. It's time to have dinner with my husband, or, and that as something recently I've been actually really working hard on, is making that choice more and making sure that's a part of my everyday.
Well, folks, it is just about time to wrap it up. And before I turn it over to Graceland for the final wrap-up to send us off here, I want to personally say thank you to all three of you ladies being here today. I am the proud papa of a 2-year-old girl. And
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I always make it about me somehow. Thank you very much. And but I just want to say, maybe she can't understand right now, but I'd love to play this video back for her one day so she could hear all these things. It's amazing. It's inspiring. And I hope she can get something from it. And I also don't think they got a round of applause when they started here. So can we get a round of applause for all three of them here today? Graceland with the send-off.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, this episode is brought to you by Staten Island Social Care Network, connecting Medicaid members to free social care services like food, housing, and transportation. Please contact them to see if you're eligible at statenislandpps.org. I'd like to thank you, heartfelt thanks to Tatiana Arguello, to Jessica Phillips, and to Jessica Baker Vodoor for being our panelists today. You were wonderful, and we could be here for another hour, but we'll stop it right here. Shane and I and our publisher, our editor, and our content director, and all the newsroom staff are so grateful to you for coming here. So thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for tuning in online and in person. And we'll see you at the 11th Conversations with Community Giants, sponsored by the Staten Island Advance, SILive.com. Thank you.